This chapter is on the physical development in infancy. I'd like to start off by talking about a true story about an infant baby. Her name was Devlin Victoria Radford, and her story is called My Heart, Soul, and Angel, and this is by Jenny Radford. And it was she wrote this in on May 20th, 2005. She wrote it for the funeral service of her daughter, Devlin Victoria Radford. Um, Devlin Victoria Radford was my heart, soul, and my angel. My favorite times spent with her were bath times. When she was very little, she would lay on her changing table and talk to the bears on the mobile above her. She would woo and smile at her bears. Then I would put her in the tub. She would smile and then she would splash. Here lately she has begun to splash you on purpose. If you ask her why she was splashing you, she would begin to giggle and splash you some more. She loved her Grampy, Grammy, and Uncle Nick. She loved everybody. One time we went to a daycare with a couple bigger kids. I was showing her off. All the kids at the daycare each got one individual smile, one at a time. I always looked forward to the day she would have siblings. Devlin was brought to me to save me from self-destruction and to show me love and what responsibility is. She changed my destiny, my saving grace. She will always be a part of my life. I will love her forever. As my angel Devlin, please watch over me. Mommy will love you always. Protect me. You will always be Mommy's little girl. I will miss you. I'll visit you all the time. Thank you for touching my heart and my soul. So this is a story about an infant baby who got what's known as sudden infant death syndrome, also known as SIDS. So what's SIDS? SIDS is basically a definite medical entity. It's experienced by seemingly healthy victims. So there's no prior medical concern or condition, no sickness occurring. It's a death that occurs quickly and it has no signs of suffering. And it's usually associated with sleep. It's currently unpredictable. No one knows when it's going to happen. It can just happen all of a sudden to an infant baby. And it's determined after an autopsy, after a death scene investigation, review of the infant's health status prior to dying, and other family medical history. The major cause of death in infants between 1 month and 1 year of age, with the most death occurring between the ages of 2 and 4 months, is infant death syndrome. So the highest risk would be between the ages of 2 and 4 months. And it claims the lives of over 7,000 American babies each year, nearly one baby every hour, every day. And I just wanted you to keep in mind that SIDS is not caused by external suffocation. So this is not caused by someone killing the baby or putting a pillow over the baby's face so that they stop breathing. It's not caused by vomiting or choking. It's not caused by child neglect or abuse, so this isn't anything that the parents are responsible for. And it's also not contagious. So this isn't something that if you know or you have a baby or you know anyone that has a baby, this isn't something that the baby can catch from other babies or catch from another individual. And I just want to kind of go over who's at risk for sudden infant death syndrome. Babies who sleep on their stomachs are at higher risk. Babies who are born to mothers who smoke during pregnancy, and also babies who are exposed to passive smoke after birth, so secondhand smoke. Even though the mother might not necessarily be smoking, the baby might be around someone that happens to smoke, like an uncle or a grandfather, father, or an aunt, or anything like that. And also, other babies that are at risk for developing sudden infant death syndrome are babies born to mothers who are younger than 20 years old at the time of their first pregnancy. So this would be teenage mothers or adolescent mothers. And also babies born to mothers who had no or late prenatal care. So prenatal care is very important, not just for sudden infant death syndrome, but for a lot of different things. So um, that's very important. Babies who are premature or those with low birth weight. So babies who are born earlier than they're supposed to be, the average time is usually 9 months. So babies who are born before that time are at higher risk for developing this, for experiencing the sudden infant death syndrome, and also babies who are low birth weight. Um, Also, babies who are placed to sleep on soft surfaces such as soft mattresses, sofas, sofa cushions, water beds, sheepskins, and other soft surfaces like that. So surfaces that are really, really soft, maybe mushy even. And also, other babies that are at risk are those that are placed to sleep in an environment containing fluffy or loose bedding, such as pillows, also a lot of pillows or blankets and quilts or other coverings, maybe a lot of stuffed animals or toys or any soft items in their vicinity of while they're sleeping. So what really causes sudden infant death syndrome? Evidence suggests that some sudden infant death syndrome babies are born with brain abnormalities that make them vulnerable to SIDS during infancy. In many SIDS babies, abnormalities are found in parts of the brainstem that use serotonin as a neurotransmitter and are thought to be involved in the control of breathing during sleep. And also sensing carbon dioxide and oxygen and the ability to wake up. So, a baby born with this abnormality might lack a protective brain mechanism that senses abnormal respiration. So, if a baby's breathing is not normal, um, their brain might lack that sensor to establish that and recognize that. Babies who sleep on their stomachs may get their faces caught in the bedding, which causes them to breathe too much carbon dioxide and too little oxygen. Um, Researchers are studying whether this is why sleeping on the stomach is hazardous, and why babies with brainstem abnormality die when sleeping in this position. A larger number of babies who died from SIDS apparently had respiratory or gastrointestinal infections prior to their deaths. So that's an interesting fact. So they had some kind of breathing problem or some kind of stomach problem in a large number of the babies who died from SIDS. This fact may explain why SIDS cases occurs during the colder months of the year, because breathing gets a little bit more difficult during winter. Researchers indicate that some SIDS babies had higher than normal number of cells and protein generated by their immune system. And some of these proteins interact with the brain to alter heart rate and also slow breathing during sleep, or put the baby into a deep sleep which may be strong enough to cause death, particularly if the baby has an underlying brain abnormality. So there are certain steps that parents or caregivers can do to lower the risk of SIDS, and that's things like placing babies on their backs to sleep instead of on their stomachs, unless it's otherwise suggested by a doctor or physician. Also, place the baby on a firm mattress, such as a safety-approved crib or other firm surface, something that's not like a waterbed or very mushy type of thing. And also remove all fluffy and loose bedding like a lot of blankets, a lot of pillows, a lot of stuffed animals, stuffed toys, things like that. Also, caregivers or parents the mother should get prenatal care. That means care while the mother's pregnant, and that includes things like proper nutrition, eating the right things, not eating certain foods which can cause damage to the fetus, also avoiding smoking or even secondhand smoke by the mother during pregnancy. Also, the mother should avoid drug or alcohol abuse or use during pregnancy. It's recommended that a mother avoid all smoking and all drug and alcohol use, which kind of sounds like an obvious thing, but it's something that some women that get pregnant don't really realize or even take into consideration. And it's also important for mothers who are pregnant to go for frequent medical checkups beginning early in the pregnancy. And also take babies after they're born for regular checkups and routine immunizations. And those are all the recommendations to lower the risk of SIDS. So some of the sources of where you can find this information about sudden infant death syndrome is on these two websites, and you can go there and find out a lot of different prevention techniques and a lot of information that you can maybe inform someone you know who has a baby. Maybe one day you're going to have a baby, maybe you already have one, or your sisters or cousins or whatever. So that's SIDS/network.org, and also preventsids.org. So those are two great websites that you can visit. So the brain contains approximately 100 billion neurons at birth. And the brain goes through extensive development, and that continues after birth through infancy and later than infancy. And research has found that the brain is developing even up to old age. Things are changing in the brain. So the brain is important, and that's why a baby's head should be protected, to protect the brain and prevent injury. There's something called shaken baby syndrome, and that's where a baby is actually physically shaken, and that can cause brain swelling and hemorrhaging from child abuse. Basically, a lot of times you'll hear on the news or read in the newspaper that a parent or caregiver got angry with the child for whatever reason, like crying or not doing what they want the baby to do, and it's not like a baby can help it, but the parent or caregiver will get angry and then they'll shake the baby, physically shake them back and forth, and that'll cause their head to kind of hit their skull, and that's a baby does not have the same physical strength that an adult has, so that can cause serious damage to the baby and even death. So continuing with the brain, early experiences are very important when thinking about the brain. Depressed brain activity has been found in children who grow up in a deprived environment. So what I mean by deprived environment is that maybe they're not they don't have access to a lot of different things, like maybe educational materials, maybe toys. That's why you'll see a lot of the babies' toys when you go to the toy store or things like that. You'll see that babies' toys have bright colors, and that's one of the reasons that's good for babies, is because it stimulates brain activity, and that's important for babies in their brain development. So even though a baby might be born in a deprived environment where they don't have all the things that maybe another baby would have, the brain is flexible and resilient, so they can still overcome that experience and enhance their brain activity in the future. Um, so, and that can happen through repeated experiences. So maybe doing basically doing something over and over again will help rewire the brain and improve functioning. So, as I said, deprived environments lead to depressed brain activity. So, enriched environments would lead to a more active brain. And it's the same way. Sometimes some of you might notice when you're not doing much, you're not in school or working, you're just at home and you're really bored and you don't have anything to do. You notice that maybe you're not at the top of your game. You're not, your brain's not at maximum capacity. You're really working as hard. So that can change your mental processes. And it's the same way for babies. So sleep is very important for a baby. This is like one of the number one things that babies are doing. They typically sleep for about 18 hours per day. Now that's a lot. They're basically sleeping the majority of the day, and they need this sleep. Infants do need more sleep than at any other time in our lives, unless someone has an illness or a medical condition. Infancy is when we as humans need the most sleep. And infants will vary in their preferred sleeping times. I don't know if you've ever been around a baby or have noticed that babies or have heard in movies or TV that babies will want to wake up in the middle of the night and they'll start crying, and parents will complain that they can't get any sleep or things like that. And that's very common because infants do vary in their preferred times for sleeping. And one of the most common infant sleep related problems is night waking. So waking up in the middle of the night, maybe waking up every 2 hours, getting hungry in the middle of the night, or just cranky. So that's also linked to excessive parental involvement in sleep related interactions with their infant. So I just wanted to kind of show you what the sleep pattern looks like across the lifespan. And you can see all the way on the left, that's where an individual is the youngest, 1 to 15 days old. And at that age, they need up to 18 hours of sleep, like I mentioned. And then as an individual gets older, that need for sleep kind of declines. And you can see it going down, 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 all the way at about 19 to 30 years old in the middle. An individual needs about, looks like 8 hours of sleep, 8 to 8.5 hours of sleep. And then as an individual gets even older, into their 70s and 80s, their need for sleep is even lower than that. And that's at about 4 or 5 hours per night. And I don't know how many of you have ever had a grandfather, grandmother, or maybe you're in your 70s or 80s. But a lot of times they will wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they're like ready to go, and then they go to sleep at earlier times in the night. But they only really need about 4 to 5 hours of sleep. I know my grandmother, she's awake. She'll go to sleep and then she'll wake up intermittently throughout the night. So she'll sleep for 2 hours and then she'll be awake for an hour and watch TV. Because basically, unless there's some kind of illness or medical condition, an adult in their 70s and 80s and above, they don't really need as many hours of sleep. And a lot of times they're not doing as much as maybe an adolescent is doing. An adolescent's waking up, going to school, playing with their friends, playing video games, very active. And then a person that's really old might just wake up, eat, watch TV, things like that. So during infancy, nutrition is another thing that's very important to keep track of. Um, Infants or babies typically need 50 calories per day for each pound that they weigh. So if let's say an infant weighs 7 pounds, they would need basically 7 pounds times 50 calories. They would need 350 calories per day of food. Um, whether that's milk or whether that's actual food, that's how many calories they would need. And then typically, an infant should, by the end of the first year of birth, be eating fruits and vegetables. Of course, baby food, fruits and vegetables. Um, Poor dietary patterns lead to increased rates of overweight and obese infants. And breastfeeding actually reduces the risk of obesity. Obesity is actually becoming very prevalent now, especially in the Western culture. So the general consensus is that breastfeeding is better than bottle feeding an infant. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The American Academy of Pediatrics, they strongly endorse breastfeeding throughout the first year. They highly recommend that a mother breastfeed an infant for the first 6 months, but even after that, they endorse that a mother should breastfeed for the first year. And there's a lot of reasons and benefits for both the mother and the child. For breastfeeding, there are benefits for the mother, which some people might not realize, but the mother will have a lower risk of breast cancer if she breastfeeds. She'll also have a lower risk of ovarian cancer and type 2 diabetes. And the child will develop a better immune system and develop antibodies that are required for an individual. So there's nearly 195 million children under the age of 5 that are malnourished or undernourished. And malnutrition affects physical and cognitive development, and the environment in which malnutrition occurs also influences the outcome. Um, there's this article that was written in 1996 called Malnutrition, Poverty, and Intellectual Development, and it overviews several interesting studies related to this complex relationship. There's more recent research that has stimulated a conceptual shift in our understanding of the relationship between malnutrition and cognitive impairments. Traditionally, what they thought the main effect model was what guided our understanding. And that model states that malnutrition during the first 2 years of life caused severe permanent brain damage. That means brain damage that cannot be changed once an individual has brain damage. That's it. They're done for the rest of their lives. And in turn, that results in cognitive impairment in an individual. So what they originally thought was that an individual who was malnourished before the age of 2 would suffer from permanent brain damage, maybe mental retardation, things like that. But this linear model is way too simplistic. Brain growth retardation is not always permanent. Like I mentioned previously, the brain is resilient. So rather, brain growth is temporarily put on hold when an individual is malnourished. So their brain might not grow while they're malnourished, but then afterwards, if their diet is improved, if they become nourished properly, the brain can rebound, especially if there's an appropriate environment involved. So there's other factors like the physical growth and quality of the environment that play a factor in an individual's brain development and also intellectual stimulation that impacts the effects of malnutrition on cognitive development. So there's more of an interactional model. It's hard to say that just one thing like malnutrition affects brain development. It's more like a lot of different things together. And it's a complicated relationship between malnutrition and cognitive development. Um, Basically, there are two life-threatening conditions that result from malnutrition, and that's one of them is marasmus, and that's a severe protein calorie deficiency, resulting in a wasting away of body tissues. So that one's kind of scary. Muscles basically are wasting away, are you know um, you won't be able to use them. And then there's another one called kwashiorkor, and that's a severe protein deficiency that causes the abdomen and feet to swell with water. Basically, it's not like it looks like the baby or child is full, but actually that swollen belly is from water, and their hair becomes thin, brittle, and colorless. And behaviors also very listless, very like a bored look on your face, very slow movements, slow bodily movements. So another thing that's occurring during infancy, as far as physical growth and development, are reflexes. Now, those of you might have heard or have experienced or seen on TV a child going to the doctor, or anyone or an individual going to the doctor, and the doctor has that little hammer, and he asks you to sit down, and then he hits your knee with the hammer, and then the individual's leg will kick automatically. And that's basically what a reflex is. It's a built-in reaction to a stimuli, to something occurring, and that's something that happens automatically in our bodies, and that's something that we're born with. Now, babies have some different reflexes than other individuals have. So these are what some of those reflexes are. One of them is the rooting reflex, and that's a reaction occurring when an infant's cheek is stroked. Then there's the sucking reflex, and that's a built-in reaction to automatically suck an object placed in the mouth. And that has something to do with wanting, eating or feeding, things like that. Then there's the moral reflex, and that's a startle response in reaction to a sudden intense noise or movement. Now that actually a lot of times happens to adults. If they're watching a scary movie and something jolts, or someone screams, or a really loud intense noise happens, people in the audience or people watching the movie might jump. And that's basically the same idea of what a moral reflex is for infants. Then there's the grasping reflex, and that's where infants grasp tightly when someone touches their palm. And you can test this out if you know any babies or know anyone that has babies. Put your finger in their hand, and they will usually close their hand, and it'll seem like they're holding your finger. But there's also other reflexes that your book doesn't mention. Newborn infants, when they're held upright with their feet on a support surface, they perform alternating step-like motions, and it looks like they're walking. This phenomenon is referred to as the stepping reflex. And the intriguing aspect of this is that this ability actually disappears or goes away a few months later and does not reappear until about 1 year, 12 months of age. Experts assume that the reflex disappears because of some genetic determined switch in the brain. And during the same developmental period that the stepping reflex was not evident in the upright position, so after it disappeared, um, there were some experiments done, and they noted that infants were experiencing rapid weight gain during that time. They were getting heavier, but not necessarily stronger, not necessarily developing muscles. So, one of the experimenters speculated that it was the interaction of the heavier legs and the biomechanically demanding posture of being upright that suppressed the stepping reflex. So, the experimenters tested their hypotheses, and they experimentally manipulated the weight of the infant's legs by submerging the infants in waist-deep water. So they put these infants in like a tub of water that was just filled very minimally. And the infants, without the added weight of their own bodies, could walk, essentially. The point to stress is that motor development is not a single causal, but rather a multi-causal developmental phenomenon. So this is what motor development looks like for the average child in months. So at about age 1 month, less than 1 month old, a baby will usually be able to lift their head. Now, if you know a baby that is not at this exact um, developmental stage in their motor development, that doesn't necessarily mean that something is wrong with them. This is just the average for all children at about age at about it's kind of a range. So between 5 and 7 and almost 8 months, a baby will be able to sit up without support from something supporting them, and they'll be able to walk alone by themselves somewhere between the age of 11 months and 14 months. The visual perception of babies is about their vision's about 20 to 40, but that vision does get better as they get older, and it increases to 20/40 by the age of 6 months. And infants do show an interest in human faces soon after birth. Um, you guys can check out my Facebook page, and I posted a video about a baby that he's 10 minutes old, and he's basically imitating his father. Um, his father's like sticking out his tongue, and the baby is sticking out his tongue, and it's pretty cool. Um, but babies spend more time looking at their mother's face than a stranger's face, as early as 12 hours after being born. So that's kind of very soon. And this is what a baby's vision typically looks like. At about 1 month after being born, you can see that their vision's pretty fuzzy. And that's actually what my vision looks like if I wasn't wearing my glasses. But this is, they're pretty much almost blind. So that actually, they also don't see color until a few months after birth. But then you can see by 1 year, by the time they reach 1 year old, they can see color. So that picture is not exactly accurate, but they can see. They're basically developed their entire visual perception. Um, and there was this experiment that was done on infants, and it's called the Eleanor Gibson and Richard Walk study. That it's basically they studied the development of depth perception in babies, and what they used was what you can see in the picture. It looks like it's a cliff. It looks like if the baby walks over, they'll fall, but actually that's a glass pane on top of on top of the surface so the baby won't actually fall. And what they did was that they wanted to see if the baby would actually walk over the glass, indicating that they don't actually have depth perception. But what they found was that infants between the ages of 6 and 12 months old can distinguish depth. So these babies would not walk over that surface, and because they potentially thought that they were scared, or they thought that they were going to fall down the cliff. There's other senses occurring. Hearing, the fetus can hear and learn sounds during the last 2 months of pregnancy. So while a baby's in the stomach, they can hear what's going on. So that's why a lot of times pregnant mothers will play music for their baby. And they can actually, it's interesting that babies can actually recognize their mother's voice after they're born, or at birth, they recognize their mother's voice. And they can also feel pain. Newborns can feel pain. So a movie suggestion related to this lecture is a movie called Jack, and that was filmed in 1996. And you can find this from your local video rental outlet. And that's starring Robin Williams, Diane Lane. And it's basically about a boy with a unique aging disorder that makes him age 4 times faster than normal children. So he has problems such as going to school for the first time and trying to become friends with children his age, and that causes him emotional stress and not just physical issues for young Jack. So that's an interesting film to check out if you want to kind of apply what you've learned in this chapter. And here's some websites. So not all the sites might be current and active, so you might occasionally encounter a dead link. Just keep that in mind when you're going through some of these websites. And these are just interesting websites related to the chapter and the lecture that you can check out at your own leisure. We have the SIDS Institute website, the Circumcision Information Resource page, infant census, the breastfeeding website, malnutrition website, National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome website, and the National SIDS Infant Death Resource Center, and also the National Center for Infants, Toddlers, and Families. And these can be useful websites, not just for yourself, but in case you'd like to recommend them to someone else. Maybe they have some kind of issue or something that you can help them out with.